He hadn't been looking for land, but just before dusk, land found him. The island wasn't on any map. It rose through the fog, silent and gray, humming with something he couldn't quite name. The traveler rowed ashore and stepped onto the soft sand, his boots sinking slightly with every step. There was no sound. There was no bird song. Even the waves sounded quiet. There was only a strange echo in the distance. Something felt strange. He could swear he wasn't alone. He paused, looked around him, but didn't see anything. Finally, he called out, "Hello?" The echo of his voice boomed in the mist and returned violently. "Go away! Go away!" He frowned. That wasn't what he had said. He walked forward slowly and asked into the misty hills before him, "Is anyone there?" The echo returned with a tremble. "Please, don't leave. Don't leave." He inhaled sharply, not from fear, but from recognition. Then, with a hand to his chest, he asked, "Why do emotions feel like a fog I can't see through?" The echo returned chaotically. "Drowning, drowning, drowning, too much, you're weak. Hide it, hide it." He dropped to his knees, overwhelmed with the booming echoes around him. Through the noise, the wind shifted and the trees rattled, and from the reeds emerged a giant crane. Tall and hunched, its feathers matted with salt, a crown of seaweed twisted above its bright glassy eyes. It started walking toward him with a slight limp. The crane looked both ancient and regal. It tilted its head and regarded the traveler for a long moment, then croaked,
"This place doesn't echo what you say. It echoes what you carry."
The traveler didn't answer. He just sat, breathing, letting the emotions rise. Not the thoughts about the emotions, but the raw, wordless tide underneath.
Feel it clearly, and it won't twist on the return.
The traveler stood slowly. He brushed the sand from his knees and looked out over the sea, and then back to the misty hills of the island. "I can feel it, and still move forward." The echoing mist returned his words clearly, matching them exactly. The crane gave a satisfied blink before unfurling his wings and rising to disappear into the fog. The traveler moved back to his boat. He didn't know what emotions would rise next, but he no longer feared the echo. This is So What Who Cares, with Laura McCarville and me, Jeff Kolaski. Join us as we explore practical insights for an impractical mind. So for this episode, we are looking into emotions, right?
Yes.
We did thought, now we're on to emotions. How they shape this experience of life that we're all going through, when they guide us, when they overwhelm us, which seems to happen in some of our lives more than others.
Yeah, it's true.
And I think, you correct me if I'm wrong here, but how we can build a better relationship with our emotions. Just like thoughts, emotions are always going to be there.
Yes.
They're always going to be
Sort of
happening.
different, but yeah.
Yeah. Which I'm interested in how you mean that.
Yeah.
Sometimes our emotions are quieter. Sometimes they're front and center. But Laura, What are emotions?
Okay. So, in a very simple way of responding, an emotion is a quick, unconscious response to stimuli.
Hmm.
Where feelings, and again, this is sort of playing with language, feelings are the conscious sort of sifting through, making sense of, right? So, emotions and feelings. Um, we are hardwired to emotion, meaning there are emotions that we will have. There are emotions that are developmental that we don't have access to um, developmentally until we do, right?
Mhm.
So this is the world of emotions.
Mhm. And to be real clear, you mentioned this before we started recording.
Mm-hmm.
Everyone out there should know that there are people who have dedicated their lives to exploring the world of emotions. So there's no way we're going to be able to to really cover everything that has to do with humanity and emotions, correct?
Oh no,
Yeah.
no, we won't. We're just
Yeah.
touching.
Yeah, okay. Um so we kind of know what, from a bird's eye anyway,
Mm-hmm.
what emotions are. We have all sorts of names for these emotions, the basics being things like happiness, right?
Mm-hmm.
Sadness,
Mm-hmm.
anger,
Mm-hmm.
some of those basic ones, but it's a
There's
lot.
there's actually I think like five basic ones.
Okay.
Um,
Happy, sad,
happy,
angry,
sad, angry, fear,
fear,
and I believe disgust is the
disgust.
fifth. Some
Oh,
people say there's
inside
seven.
out.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yep.
um,
That's right.
but we are, but there's a lot more complexity than just those basics, right? There's a
Mm-hmm.
lot of, and we are limited a lot in our language,
Oof. Yeah.
when we when we get into not just English,
Right.
especially English, but not just English, in language as a whole. How do you um, put an accurate name to those things?
Yeah. So I think what you're speaking to is this thing called emotional granularity.
Mm.
So when we have an emotion, how are we able to give language to it internally and externally?
Mm.
So, how do we know what that emotion is? And our ability to understand or relate or process an emotion really is informed, familiar, like in our familiar line, excuse me, in our culture.
Hmm.
Um, so and then if really if I want to come back to like how we were raised,
Hmm.
the value of an emotion, what's good, what's not good. um so because emotions in general, the emotion, the five we named, and then as we develop more come available to us, they're not good or bad in
Hmm.
nature. They're visitors.
Labels.
Hmm.
Even you talking about having an internal language to recognize certain emotions and things like that almost makes my skin crawl because I want to put a label on stuff.
Yeah,
You know what I mean?
so
You called it granularity, but I want to but yeah, but how do you describe that? How do you?
okay, so like here comes an emotion and our ability, and not, I mean, this is really, I would say, something of a skill to get as adults. This is really important to be able to do. Um, our ability to go like, oh, this is, what is this? Oh, it's sadness. Oh, okay, sadness. And right. So sadness can be kind of an obvious
Mhm.
one, maybe. Fear, our emotions can couple. So for me, a lot of times my anger will present as sadness first.
Mm.
And with time, I've learned, oh, I've got to sort of uncouple what these two emotions
Mm.
are and know that what I'm actually really angry about this thing that's happening. But what I've learned to do or how I learned to work with that emotion is through crying. So now I can actually learn maybe a different way to be with that emotion, right? So we're kind of talking about like as we mature and as we work with emotional granularity, it's sort of parsing out, well, like, what is this actual emotion that's
Mm,
visiting here?
yeah. Do we have like go-to or knee-jerk emotions, or like, for lack of a better term, do we become addicted to certain emotions?
Mm, yes, we can.
Okay.
Right. So, um, glee,
Yeah.
not being happy. So, if we use the definition of happy, knowing everything's going to be okay, is very
Mm-hmm.
different than glee
Mm-hmm.
and that like high sense of happiness, where
Mm-hmm.
you're sort of what maybe the language in psychedelics would be like chasing the dragon. Like you're like
Mm-hmm.
always looking for that next like
Next thing,
hit,
yeah.
right? Because I want to feel that like emotion of glee.
Right.
But the truth is, we can also get hooked on the negative
Mm.
emotions. And so, um, I think there was a study done that I heard around gambling, and it wasn't the winning that was hooked. It was the emotions of losing is where the hook was, and that's so interesting to me.
Yeah,
But
why?
I think it's again, it's our emotions secrete hormones,
Mm-hmm.
right? And so there are chemicals that release some juju in the brain that says
Right.
like this is it, and
Huh.
some of those things we can get a little hooked on, right?
Yeah. But you said so emotions are not and you said emotions are not necessarily good or bad,
Mhm.
but there is such a thing as positive and negative
Yeah.
emotions. What about those?
Okay.
I know we
So
kind of touched on it,
yeah,
but
so we can people will tend to put like sadness or emotions that are difficult or uncomfortable into negative, and the ones that are associated more with positive, like the ones that are easy for us to handle
mhm,
as like the good emotions, maybe like
yeah.
happiness, joy, so we'll say like one's positive, one's negative. But these emotions, they're going to come and go. I think what happens is we try to seek only the positive ones and create a life with only like the positive emotion. That's where it gets a little problematic because the
Hmm.
reality is things are going to happen,
Right.
and the spectrum. And I mean, it's part of the magical thing of being human is that we have this range of emotions. We're often taught when we're younger, just and I can only speak to like what's acute, like what's here, but
Hmm.
to sort of suppress emotions, or we're taught what ones are positive and which ones are negative
Hmm.
based on what our parents can handle or what the
Right.
school can
Right.
handle, what your church believes in,
Right.
what your community holds as true. So we're informed really of how we work with those emotions.
The classic example of a young boy being told that he's weak because he's feeling
Sad.
sad or sensitive.
Hmm.
Yeah.
Yeah, yeah, that's one I'd like to spend time with.
Me too. I think I get a little confused sometimes about when we go back to the granularity and the
Yeah.
language behind it. What exactly is there a difference between a feeling and an emotion? Is there a difference between like a nervous system state and an emotion? Because one of the things that you challenged me to consider when we came before we came here was, do I have a preferred state? Do I have a go-to emotion, right?
Hmm.
And I was thinking about that, and like I feel like while I know I don't want to say everybody, because I
Hmm.
know people who will, if they're being honest with themselves, their go-to emotion is happiness, let's just say, or even
Yeah,
happiness as
sure.
we've described it
Yeah.
isn't necessarily their go-to, because I've known people where I feel like they thrive in chaos or misery, right?
Right.
Where as soon as things start to feel good, they go into I gotta find something bad,
Hmm.
right? That's not me, I don't think. Well, I know that that's not me. But
Yeah.
is feeling in control, is feeling calm, is feeling content. Are those emotions, or are those states?
Yeah, so emotions can become states,
Okay.
right? So we might have um, an emotion that comes to visit and then it stays for a while and it becomes a state. Now, um, how we metabolize or move through emotions is what we're talking about when you and I are talking like with the human experience and what are some tools to work with the human experience.
Mhm.
We want to be able to shift states, right? So, for example, if our go-to emotion is happiness and something happens that's sad and we need to grieve, and our happiness is in juxtaposition of the grief, and we won't, when in fact we need both to sense and feel
Mhm.
to the aliveness of being a human, the beauty of this thing.
Mhm.
um but we could push the grief and we could pretend it's not happening and avoid it because we've got these sort of filter of I only do like I'm in the happy
Mhm.
emotion, and that's not being happy.
Yeah.
So that's where we go, where we work with emotions as like passerby, right? And not getting stuck in a state. That doesn't mean um, we shouldn't move towards emotions. Let's say we're in grief and there's something happening and it's grief is visiting. If we don't metabolize it, if at some point we don't start to, for lack of a better word, choose a different emotion or
Mhm.
do something to sort of hack our system to try on other emotions,
Mhm.
that grief can get stuck. And we could
Right.
go years and years and years stuck in that
And
state.
does that look like depression sometimes, anxiety?
Sure. So when emotions
Can.
get stuck for long periods of time, it
Mhm.
can move to a place of nervous system dysregulation where then we are in states of, depression,
Mhm.
anxiety.
So we've talked about how to regulate or some tools to regulation
Mm-hmm.
to our nervous system.
Sure.
What about those emotions? What if I find myself things in my environment I have changed and I'm noticing that like yeah the sun's out my my account isn't empty and even if it was I'm feeling okay or whatever it might be but I can't shake this grief feeling or this sadness feeling. What does emotional regulation look like?
Yeah. So okay. So emotional regulation, um, I'm not a super fan of emotional regulation of how it's being exploited, in the way of the expectation of calm.
Mm-hmm.
Meaning we always need to be calm, emotionally regulated, calm. And that isn't what emotionally regulated means.
Mm-hmm.
What I'm interpreting or what's being taught across some platforms and boards is like emotional regulation means I'm now comfortable. You're not emotionally regulated, meaning I'm not comfortable with the emotion you're having. You need to just calm down.
Mm-hmm.
Do you see how that's different?
Absolutely, yeah.
So I'm not in the way in which emotional regulation is being misused as this like manipulative tool to create a sense of comfort for self.
Mm-hmm.
Eh. What I'm not
Yeah,
engaging in that.
sure.
But emotional regulation meaning I have agency with this emotion. And glee, again, I go back to glee because that too can have us,
Mm-hmm.
right? Just like anger as an emotion can have us. So disgust can have us, meaning now I'm not eating anything for long periods of time because that disgust has us, right?
Mm-hmm.
So all of these emotions can have us. If you have agency, if you can be with it, if you can learn to hold it with loving kindness and compassion and awareness of, oh, there's a little bit of truth, but there's a little bit of not truth in this
Mm-hmm.
emotion too, right?
Right.
Here it is. It's visiting, and I'll be with it until the next one comes. That's what what I'm talking
Mm-hmm.
about as regulated, an emotionally regulated person. They can be
Right.
with the spectrum of emotions.
Right. These emotions sometimes stick around a lot longer
Mm-hmm.
than even if I'm I've learned to regulate in a way where I want to say comfortable, because I've never felt comfortable when I'm super angry or anything like that, but like acceptance maybe, or understand, or holding it like you said until the next one comes along. The next one's not coming along.
Mm-hmm.
That's where I get a little tied up, because like we talked about this before in another episode, but for how long? How long until this becomes, a thing where I don't want to be stuck in sadness forever,
No.
and that's what it starts to, and we go back to our thoughts and things like that, um, and how those affect the things around us, and what we're letting stick around for a long time. And
Mm-hmm.
thoughts are one thing. Emotions, like, what happens if those don't start to fade or don't start to change or anything like that? Like,
Mm-hmm.
are we supposed to just become okay with that and go, well, I guess this is the one I'm stuck with?
Yeah, no, I would say what we want to work to is the full spectrum of the human experience
Mm-hmm.
of I can tap into these different ones. Now, if one is coming for a long period of time
Mm-hmm.
and it's like, okay, I need to do a little emotional biohacking,
Mm-hmm.
like that's legit, right? Like, okay, I actually need to come out of this state and give myself permission to break from this emotional state. And we can do that by engaging in the senses. So, yes, music is a huge one, right? And we see this happen all the time. Now, someone can put on music that feeds their sadness. They're
Mm-hmm.
in a heartbreak and they're going to put on some music and it's going to make them even more sad and they want to, when what really maybe they need to put on something that like lifts it up.
Mm-hmm.
And we start to we start to move into a different emotion. We let
Yeah,
that emotion, we do have to interrupt it.
because it's been here too long.
Yeah.
Because when you're saying those things, I said that I've never been comfortable in anger, but I don't know if that's true, because there are times where anger comes, and then we don't want to not be angry yet. Our body's telling us, or our mind, or whatever's telling us,
Hmm.
like, this anger's still necessary and you need to stay that way. Obviously, that gets dangerous if you let it stick around for too
Yeah.
long. Or sadness, like you mentioned, a breakup, or my cat that died last year.
Yeah.
I didn't want that sadness to go away for a
Well,
long time, because
yeah.
for some reason it felt right.
Well, what did you
This
feel?
felt bad. It felt awful, but it was,
You also felt something else with the sadness.
well, love.
Yeah,
Yeah.
yeah.
Is that what you were getting at?
Yeah,
Yeah.
connection or love.
Yeah.
Right.
And but it even, like, breakups or
Mhm,
whatever it may be,
mhm,
I'm not ready to be done with the sadness because it serves a purpose,
mhm,
right?
mhm.
I don't know what that purpose is. I don't know why our nervous systems came up with, or our bodies came up with uh, a feeling like sadness to mourn. Like,
Yeah.
what does that benefit? I don't know. I don't know how to answer that.
Well, it's interesting because that plays into culture so much, and
Hmm.
I can check this or not if it's true, but I've always
Yeah.
heard the story that in some cultures, when you're born, people cry because you had to come back,
Mm,
and when you die, people laugh because they're so happy,
right.
right? So there's some
Mm,
understanding of like assignment of emotion in
yeah.
our culture and what's the purpose it plays. We know disgust. This is a very interesting emotion to me because
Yep.
disgust is so ancient. It predates verbal, so someone before we had language, if we ate berries and they were poisonous, the emotion, and then we'd go into sensation, which is next. But on another podcast, we go into disgust as
Hmm.
a communication of like, this isn't good.
Well, why am I disgusted by mushrooms and some people aren't?
I don't know that
Okay.
one. I'm not sure. I love mushrooms, so I
Oh,
can't
well,
especially can't
gross.
answer that one. Yeah,
That's gross.
it's probably texture, but we'll go.
Yeah. Anyway, yeah. Yeah, but I think, sorry to
No, no,
derail us
no.
there.
But what we were saying is if the emotion's visiting and it's visiting for so long that it starts impacting again our relationships, our connection to community, our work, our vision. This is like a visual because I like metaphor and visual, but those like tinted sunglasses.
Mm-hmm.
And let's imagine I put yellow tinted sunglasses on someone, but they didn't even know they had yellow tinted sunglasses on. And then they're walking around and everything looks yellow and they think, well, this is just how life is, right?
Mm-hmm.
Emotions can do that too. So sometimes we have that emotion for so long, we go, well, this is just how life is,
Mm-hmm.
right? It's just sad. Or everything is through the filter of anger, everything's through the filter of an emotion. And and so then again, the emotion has you,
Mm.
right? And then we have to work, a lot of us have to work with growing the capacity of the other positive emotions, right?
Mhm.
I really know how to feel angry and sad,
Mhm.
but joy or happiness, I don't know how to tap into that. That feels uncomfortable and we have to
Right.
grow our window. But we can change our emotional state.
Speak to that.
So again, back to music.
Yeah.
So just like the person who was heartbroken and then added sad music, they were prolonging that emotional state. But let's say we put on something that was vibey and good and got someone going, right? And then we're engaging in a different emotional state. So music's a
Just
great one.
Yeah, it is.
Mhm.
Just to counter that or
Yeah.
discuss that a little bit, does that kinda get us into some of the toxicity because let me
Yeah.
explain where that thought comes from. If let's just say I lost my cat, right? And I was feeling sad and someone's like, "Put on this happy music, it'll make you feel better." Because we can change Laura said we can change our emotional state by listening to upbeat, happy music. Probably gonna rip their radio out of their hand and throw it or
Yeah.
whatever it may be.
Right.
S
Yeah, so
Where's the
where
time
does
and the
it get
place that
toxic?
where's
Yeah.
the time and the place? How do you Is there a way to kinda know? Do we just know? Is it like, is our body gonna tell us? Because if I can see the benefit in something like that if it's me that puts on that music and because I'm ready. But if I'm not,
And that's
or
so interesting
yeah,
because then we're talking about, does the person with the yellow sunglasses
know
know?
that they're wearing it.
Right.
You
And
mentioned
so
that they didn't.
so at
Yeah.
some point when the emotional state starts to interfere with our access to other emotions,
Mhm.
or our access to connection to self or others, when we start to hypnotize ourselves with the emotion and perseverate and get hooked on the
Mhm.
emotion in that addictive way, then we know, then that's how we know, like, ooh, hmm, I might need to check myself. That doesn't, and maybe we don't go from like sad music to happy music,
Yeah.
but maybe we do start to go with like something a little more neutral.
Sure. Yeah. What role do you think other people play in helping us to determine those things?
Mhm.
Or
Determine when
eh,
we're ready to shift out of a
well,
different emotion or just help us to understand
maybe,
them.
well, maybe not ready to, but help us in maybe noticing. If I
Mhm.
tell you, "Hey, do you know you have yellow sunglasses on?" Is
Yeah.
that beneficial?
It
Is that
can be.
okay?
It can be. It can also be rather confusing to the person with the yellow sunglasses
Yeah.
on,
Yeah.
right? Um, so I would say relationship, and connection. This is where community is so
Mhm.
important because isolation and loneliness is a emotion feeling. um it can cloud sort of our access to the loneliness, and isolation can cloud our access to knowing if we've got the yellow sunglasses on slash
Mhm.
we've been in too long and it's been too much.
Mhm.
um I would say illness, if our
Mhm.
body's starting to get sick, right? We're not able to take care of, like, those
Right.
are severe cases.
Mhm.
But when we're in connection with people, when we're in community, um, when we're in relationship, then I think that is the juice of
Mhm.
this human experience to be like, whoa, I can really feel like I can tell something's going on with you. Do you want to tell me Do you want to share with me, like, what emotions visiting, or if you're having some emotions around that?
Right.
But man, that's a trip. I had to get myself an emotional wheel. There's this like
Hmm.
little picture. It's like a picture of all these emotions on
Yeah.
this emotional. Have you seen it?
Yeah.
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 And I
Absolutely.
and I really had to go like, because I could tell you where I could feel and things in my body,
Right.
and I could intellectualize the shit out of things.
Hmm.
But to tell you what I was actually emotionally feeling, that was hard for me,
Yeah.
and still is. It's still hard for me.
Yes.
You know, if I've got like a da 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 da, and I want
Hmm.
to take it to, my beloved, and I've got a thought, I got the thought.
Yeah.
But if I
Are you
stop,
angry? Well, no,
I wouldn't even.
but I am, but I'm
Yeah,
not, but I'm sad, but
maybe.
I'm angry, but I'm,
Right.
yeah.
Oh, and when we were first dating, he would say to me, "You're angry," and I was like, "No, I'm not," because I had coupled anger with tears. I'm like, I'm actually crying.
Can't you
I'm
tell I'm sad?
sad. And he's like, "No, dude, that's anger." It
uh,
took me a lot of years,
yeah.
like I'm talking. Just recently, back to
Hmm.
Lamarad Owens and Love and Rage, like, I
Hmm.
had to really learn how anger landed in me and
Mm.
that it was okay for it to land in me.
Yeah.
I had to learn how to be with that emotion and identify it, and I'm still working on it as to what I do now is when I have, like, a quippy thought or I have some thoughts, I can really ask myself, and this is just me being curious
Hmm.
about me, is like, "Well, what's the feeling here?" And I don't know. I'm gonna
Yeah.
get on my wheel and kind of check
Yeah.
in. Oh,
Yeah.
oh, oh, wow. I mean, it's
Right.
so beautiful to be able to hold this curiousness of the human experience.
Yeah. If I can back us up just
Oh
a
yeah.
little bit, I keep going back to while we're talking for some reason in my mind, excuse me, I keep going back to, and I'm curious of how you would interact with or maybe coach or help
Mm,
that person that I would have described thrives in misery,
okay.
right? The person who, as soon as things start feeling quote unquote good or positive, they almost identify as a sad or a moody or a broody person. Is that okay? Is that like, how would you address that? What is that? Is
I
that
mean, anything's okay if that's how you want to live. I mean, I'm not concerned. But if
okay?
you're leaking on me and we're in relationship, like
Right.
then what I'm saying is if someone wants to be stewing around upset, that's their choice with this precious
Hmm.
life. But if they're coming to me saying, "Hey, I've been stuck."
Mm.
And when something good starts to come along and I start to kind of wig out a little, or I don't like feeling that way, or that makes me feel uncomfortable to feel peace or happiness.
Hmm.
Then we can start to get curious about that.
Because now they're acknowledging and they're maybe they haven't got to a place where they are not
Well, they have interest in change, if you will, if the words
sure.
change,
Yeah.
right? And growth. So
Right.
then I've got some ideas of
Okay.
what to work with. And if you remember one of our podcasts, we talked with titration,
Hmm.
um, or we talk with like building a little bit of capacity. We're talking too, is like building a capacity for joy
Hmm.
or well-being or a capacity for peace.
Yeah.
Um, and that takes bit by bit. We have to build a bit of tolerance to it. And maybe in
Hmm.
the beginning it feels a little uncomfortable and we're looking for the bad thing to happen. And then we go, "Oh gosh, I actually felt peace for a little bit." And we get to acknowledge it. And then that acknowledgement of it sort of creates a feedback of like,
Hmm.
"Oh, this is actually okay. Okay. I survived feeling happy.
Hmm.
Whew. Okay, cool."
I wonder how much of that too can be traced back to when
Well,
I've like protection, guard. If
experience,
I if
right?
I'm already low, then I can't get low again. It feels so much more shocking if I'm allowing in joy, I'm allowing in peace, and I'm allowing
Mm.
happiness and contentment and these things, whether those are emotions or states, I don't fucking know.
Yeah.
But
Yeah.
but it hurts so much more to fall from up there as it does to if I'm already down here.
Well, that's the lie.
Is it though?
That's the story. But is it? Because I was challenged on this once.
Okay.
So, um, a long time ago, we were adopting, and this little girl and I was like hesitant to be excited. And a woman I would say is was a teacher, said to me on my path, she said, Laura, I'm really hearing your hesitation and your excitement. And what you think is if you hold back being excited about this and it doesn't happen, you'll feel less sad. But it doesn't really work like that. If you don't get her, you're going to be sad and devastated, no matter how happy you are when you're sharing this with me. And you know what? We didn't get her. She wasn't placed in our home. And the truth was, I was just as sad as if I were to be telling people about getting to adopt her and that the adoption was working. The guard is, and it's not wrong, it's just the story we tell ourselves is if I'm guarded, or the story could be, well, last time I got sad, I wasn't guarded. And the reason I was sad is because I wasn't guarded, right? So we move into this thing of beliefs, our experiences. And so, yeah, we do, you said like trauma, we could use the word experiences. Sure. So we have experiences that inform our ability to be in emotions. And sometimes experiences will tell us a belief about an emotion. Like you get too happy, you're going to get sad.
So maybe it's not the actual emotion that you're feeling that's worse or better based on how what you're making yourself stay in order to defend yourself against that. But I do, maybe the perception or the desire to not, let's just say, not feel stupid. Mm-hmm. If I'm already the person who is unwilling to really let myself feel that, and then I let myself feel that good, that happy, that joy, and then something happens that knocks me back down. Didn't I look fucking stupid? Mm-hmm. So I don't know how much of that plays into it either, or how relevant.
Right. So that's a belief, right? Stupid's not really a feeling. I think vulnerable would be a feeling, but what the belief is I can't look stupid. Mm. Right. I don't want people to think I'm stupid. Mm-hmm. That's like the thought and the belief of what you're speaking to. Yeah. But if we say like the emotional thing you're trying to avoid is the vulnerability, you should try doing a podcast.
I might look into that.
Because that is vulnerability there, right? And not wanting to look stupid.
Yeah. Well, I don't really mind looking stupid. That's
we're just talking
anyone who's
story.
Watched my shows know that I'm not. Yeah.
We're just working out a story then.
Yeah.
Right?
Before we go.
Okay.
And it's okay if this is right along with the same thing when we talked about thoughts, if it's sensory activation, that sort of thing, great. Mm-hmm. I do think that I know I enjoy getting something, just a little tidbit of, okay, I'm feeling stuck in an emotion, or I'm ready to
transmute the emotion.
Yeah. What's your advice? Our listeners are going, I'm going to do this on my drive to work right now. What's your advice?
Well, I'm going to go back to music. I'm going to say, put on an album that makes you want to move and dance or sing. And then
Can I ask you to be vulnerable for a second? Mm-hmm. After this podcast, what do you recommend they put on? After we're done, don't change the channel yet. But what's my specifically should they put on to dance to? Okay, so this isn't to dance to, but there are a couple of things that I go to. Mm-hmm. So J Dilla Donuts album, I go to that one. That's like my go-to album when my mind is looping with thoughts, or I'm stuck in an emotion and I need to like run or walk it out. If I'm dancing, I'm going to put on Rufus or Sophie Tucker, something EDM if I'm going to dance it out. Interesting. Mm-hmm. Cool.
Or the Grateful Dead and Fish. So if I want to like spin around. Yeah, so those are my go-tos.
Or how many of those are you eating ice cream while you're...
You know what's interesting about eating ice cream is eating does change your emotions too.
Goddamn right it does. Mm-hmm. It really does.
It does,
Yeah.
right? It's interesting. It gets a lot of shame, but I wish it didn't, because that's not a bad thing to be like, actually, let's go eat some ice cream.
Yeah.
I mean, it's known, right? Like,
Yeah. My wife and I do that off, like, today kind of sucked. You want to go get an orange leaf?
yeah.
The island grew smaller in the distance, but what it showed him stayed close. He hadn't needed to fight the echoes, only to recognize them. Emotions still stirred with him, complex, shifting, sometimes loud, but now he could meet them with honesty. And with each breath, he trusted himself a little more. The boat moved forward, and so did he.